All right, so this is going to be volume 3 of the Black Viking series. And as I stated after or at the end of volume 2, this is going to be an even further investigation into the origins of the Scandinavians, i.e. the Vikings. And just like volume 2, it's going to be an investigation into like their ancestry. Okay, so but with this volume, with volume 3, this is going to be an even deeper and an even further historical investigation, or an investigation that is going to go back even further into history as it pertains to who the ancestors of the Danes were according to the Bible. Okay, because as I stated at the end of volume 2, the Vikings, or the Scandinavians, do in fact have ancestry that goes all the way back to the nation of Israel in the Bible. Okay, and so I'm gonna go about proving that in this volume here. So let's get started. So I'm going to be reading from a book called The History of Scandinavia. This is another book that you guys can go and pick up if you're interested in the Vikings, or if I possibly have piqued your interest in the Vikings all throughout this series. You guys can go about finding this book and reading it. Let's just read real quick here what this author has to state about the etymology of the word Denmark, and then even the etymology of the word Dane, and how it relates to one of the 12 sons of Jacob, that being Dan, right, which is where you get the tribe of Dan from. So now let's go about reading this real quick. So I'm going to start from right about here. So in Christ's time, Frode, Fredegod Pacific is said to have been king of Denmark. The rulers at that time were not called kings, but Drots and Rig, ruler of Skane, adopted first the title of king. In generation AD 250, begins with Dan Michelati the Splendid, or Dan the Splendid. So as this author is about to state here, a lot of historians believe that the word Denmark, or that the word Dane, derives from this man right here, Dan Michelati, who was regarded as the founder of the country known as Denmark. Okay, but as we're about to read, that's not necessarily the case. But let's keep reading. So almost all historians agree that he was the founder of the country called Denmark. Some have him from derived the name Denmark, but it is more probable that it has originated from the word Dane, denoting low or flat, and from mark, denoting overgrown with wood. The name Denmark thus denoting a flat land overgrown with wood. So the way this author defines the word Dan, or the origin of the word Dan, is from the literal definition of the word Dan, that being a low or a flat land, right? And then mark, of course, overgrown with wood. So he's trying to define the word Denmark, or the name of Denmark, and then even Dane, with the literal definition. But let's go about seeing here that the word Dane actually does have relation with the word Dan. Okay. So now we're at the Merriam-Webster dictionary. So Dane, as we can see here, the little cognate right here is Dan, or is spelled like Dan. Okay. So now let's scroll down here. So history and etymology for Dane. So Middle English, Dan. From Old Norse, Danar. Okay, so the word Dane, as we can see here, at least in the Middle English form, is equivalent to Dan. And then Old Norse is Danar, which, as we're about to see, that basically just means Dan as well, or the Danes, I believe. But we're about to see that in a minute. So, but just remember that Middle English, Dane equals Dan. So now let's go about seeing even further the connection that the word Dane has with Dan. So now we're in the Wiktionary definition of Dan. So now we're going to investigate the name Dan in its relationship to Dane. So this is the Swedish definition of the word Dan. So Dan, casual pet form, Dene or Dana. Biblical Dan, okay? A male given name derived from Old Norse Dinar, a Dane, Daniel, in biblical Dan. So once again, this definition right here is linking up the name Dane or Dan with the word Dane, right? So once again, Dinar, we saw this word in the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition. Dinar means a Dane. So, and then this word right here is being linked up with the name Dan, but particularly, as it states right here, the biblical Dan. So it's obvious that the biblical Dan, or at least the name of the biblical Dan, has a direct correlation with, according to this definition, it has a direct correlation with the name or the word Dane, right? So now let's scroll up real quick and see another. Let's go to the Norwegian. So proper noun, Dan, biblical Dan, a male given name derived from Old Norse. So it's the same definition, but as we can see here, once again, this definition derives from the Norwegian, the Norwegian definition, right? So obviously, Swedish and Norwegian, those are two Scandinavian kingdoms, or two Scandinavian tribes, the Norwegians and the Swedes. So in according to what they define the word Dan as meaning, they both of these words, or both of these tribes denote that the word Dan actually has a connection with Dane. Okay, so now let's look at another one. So Middle English, Dan, plural, Danes, alternative form of Dane. So this should make it clear. This should make it clear as day. Dan is an alternative form of Dane. Okay? So Dane is equivalent to Dan. And as we've seen from each definition, it's in reference to the biblical Dan. It's not just in reference to any Dan or just the name Dan. It's in reference to the biblical Dan. So now let's just scroll up real quick and see even further. Let me see here. So Danish, same thing. Biblical Dan, a male given name derived from Old Norse. Dinar, a Dane. Okay, so once again, the biblical Dan, or one of the 12 sons of Jacob. His name, particularly his name, because as we can see, it goes out of its this Wiktionary definition goes out of its way to include specifically the biblical Dan, along with the word dinar or a Dane, as if to correlate these two terms here. So once again, the term Dane derives from Dan. So the Danes, right, or the northern Germanic tribe of the Danes, who are the Danes, who are regarded as the ancestors of the Scandinavians or the Vikings. Their names are actually Dans, or the Dans, right? i.e. the tribe of Dan. Okay, but let's go about proving that even further. So that's our first piece of evidence right there, that the word Dan, or that the Dans, those are the Danes, and that they considered themselves the Danes, right, or the tribe of Dan. So now let's read further. Let's go about proving this further. Alright, so now the book that I'm about to read from right here is called the Hebrew and Iberian Race book. You guys can go and check that out as well. So this book is basically about the connection that the people of Europe, or at least a specific people of Europe, have with the Hebrews of the Bible. Hence the name the Hebrew or the Israelites and the Iberian race, right? So if you guys remember, I referenced the Iberians in Volume 2, and I stated, or I was able to state and then briefly prove that the Iberians were in fact the ancestors of another tribe known as the Celts. So the Celts, they're regarded as being the first settlers of the British Isles, i.e. Scotland, Ireland, England, and Wales, and then other places too, but they're mainly associated with those four countries. But the Celts and the Iberians, those are basically the same people, okay? And as this book implies, they're both descended from the nation of Israel. And just as an aside, the language of the Gaelic language, which is the language of the ancient Irish, that language has very, very parallel similarities with Hebrew, or the Hebrew language, i.e. the language that was spoken by the Israelites. But that's going to be another video series for another day. So, but I just want to read a quick little entry from this book right here. So let's read this right here. So the Vandals were a Germanic tribe. So remember the Germanic tribes, right, are the Aboriginal people of Germany. Those were the ancestors of the Scandinavians or the Vikings, particularly the northern Germanic tribes, right? Like the Danes, those were a northern Germanic tribe. All right, so let's read further. So the Vandals have been already referred to in connection with the Hebrews or Cimbri of Germany, forming the Hebrews or Cimbri and the Vandals substantially the same race of people. So the Cimbri, those were a Germanic tribe, but these were a Germanic peoples. Some people state that they were Celtic or Gaulish, which is just another Celtic tribe, the Gauls. Some people say that they're Celtic, but they settled in the Jutland Peninsula, and so as I think I've already referenced, the Jutland Peninsula, that's in Denmark. Okay, so but the Cimbri, they're oftentimes regarded as the ancestors of the Danes, and so let me just go about proving that real quick. So now we're back in the Ancient and Modern Britons book. So now let's start from right about here. So there is scarcely enough evidence to fully warrant this conclusion, but there are some resemblances between the two barbarian hordes. Both were Scythians, so I'm going to go into the Scythians in much later series, because those people are very, very important. So, but this does not mean much, and the vast bodies and dreadful looks of the Cimbri suggest the broad shoulders and other dreadful looks of the Huns. The Huns were of a dark complexion. So once again, I'm going to be going over the Huns too. And the Huns, they have a very, very significant connection with the Scythians, but that'll be for later. So, but the Huns were of a dark complexion, and so were the Cimbri, as shall be afterwards seen. So, as I stated, the Cimbri are regarded as the ancestors of the Danes. And as this man right here, Mr. David McRitchie, states, the Cimbri, like the Huns, were of a dark complexion. So once again, the Danes, those were the Dub Genti, or the Dub Gaul, or the dark foreigners, and the black Gentiles and the black foreigners, right? So this just further corroborates that. But let's keep reading. So both were plainly of a warlike and nomadic disposition. They were both, in fact, latrones, meaning pirates, freebooters, pirates. It seems likely, in short, that the Hinnau were in Europe several countries before the date assigned by Duguinis, although fresh hordes swarmed westward out of Asia in the early part of the Christian era. The country inhabited by the Cimbri was, it is stated, the modern Denmark, right, i.e. the Jutland Peninsula, and Holstein, which I believe is in Germany, which indeed received from them the name of Cimbrica, Chersonius, or the peninsula of the Cimbri. But those Cimbri are said to have been known by another name, Adonai Edem que Cimbri, the Danes. Okay, so once again, the Cimbri, those were the Danes. Okay, so let's go about seeing another source that confirms that, though. So this is a Latin dictionary, if I'm not mistaken. But let's read this entry right here. Kind of hard to see, but I'm gonna try and read it to the best of my ability. So it's basically the same thing. Denai Edem que Cimbri, the Danes. So this is an original translation of what Mr. David McRitchie stated about the Cimbri, or about this Latin entry meaning the Danes, right? And then of course we can see, or at least we can kind of see, that the word Cimbri, or that the names of the Cimbri, are included in this definition right here. So once again, the Cimbri, those were in fact the quote-unquote Danes, okay? So, and just going back to the Hebrew and Iberian race book, let me see if I can go back to it. Alright, so just going back to the Hebrew and Iberian race book, it states that the Cimbri were Hebrews, or that they were regarded as Hebrews. According to this according to this author right here, I believe his name was Henry Kilgore. Yeah, so but he states right here that the Hebrews are the Cimbri. So the Cimbri, they derive from the quote-unquote Hebrews, or the nation of Israel, okay? So if the Cimbri derive from the nation of Israel, according to this person right here, and the Cimbri are the ancestors of the Danes, or the the Germanic tribe, the northern Germanic tribe, that are regarded as the ancestors of the Scandinavians, then what does that make the Scandinavians, or the Vikings, right? All right, so now we're going to stay in the Hebrew and Iberian race book. And I just want to read this little passage right here, this little highlighted portion right here, that's going to once again confirm that the quote-unquote Germans, or the ancient people of Germany, known as the Germanic tribes, had a very, very, or at least according to this author right here, had a very, very prevalent quote-unquote Jewish population amongst their ranks. Okay, so now let's read this let's read this this sentence right here, this highlighted sentence. So let me see. Let me just start right here. That the Jews have been before and during the period of written history. So the period of written history, that goes all the way back to antiquity, around I think 3000 BC. I believe is when written history started to come about. So this is obviously referencing something that's very, very ancient. So during the period of written history, and still are, so it's talking about the Jews still being numerous in Germany and Poland. Okay, so this author is stating here that going all the way back to antiquity, or ancient times, the Jews were in abundance amongst the Germans, okay, or amongst the people of Germany. And then of course it lists Poland too. So the people of Poland, those are another group of people that I will be talking about on this channel. But that's another video for another day. But the Germans obviously are the people who are being referenced here, or the ancient people of Germany, I should say, who, as I've already stated and as I've already been able to prove, the people of Germany, or the Germanic tribes, those were the Scandinavians or the Vikings, okay? So now let's look at something else that'll confirm that. So now let's read this sentence right here, this highlighted sentence right here. So it may also be remarked that in ancient Germany and the surrounding countries where the Hebrew race were and are in such large numbers. Okay, so once again, he's referencing ancient Germany. Okay, ancient Germany, i.e. the the place where the ancient Germans settled, and them being very, very large, or the Hebrew race being very, very large in number amongst the Germans, okay? So once again, this just proves even more what I've been stating about the Vikings. But you know what? Let's go to an actual Bible verse in the Bible that has a correlation with one of the sayings having to do with the chief god of the Scandinavians, or really the chief god of all of the Germanic tribes, because for those of you who heard the first volume, when I did the little entry about the gods, like for a very brief moment, I mentioned the god Odin, right? So Odin, or the All-Father, was the god primarily associated with the Scandinavians, or the quote-unquote Vikings, but he was really the god, or one of the main gods of all the Germanic tribes, or all the Germanic people, okay? So, but let's just look at a Bible verse that is going to correlate with a saying that the Vikings had about their god, their chief god, Odin. Okay, so now Romans 8:31, this is a very famous verse. Some of you may know it, but I'm going to just read it real quick. So what then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Okay, so this is going to be the verse that we need to keep in mind for the quote that I'm about to pull up, that the Vikings oftentimes would use. I believe as I believe they would use it as like a chant or something before they went into battle. But let's see real quick here what the Vikings used to say about Odin. So now let me start from right about here. Actually, you know what? I'm going to read this whole entire paragraph. So the Norseman's dearest and most important property were his arms. So this is in reference to, of course, the more militaristic aspect of the Viking society. Okay, so now let me keep reading. In ancient times, they were plain and artless, and like other implements made of stones, later of copper. For it was a long time before the Norsemen learnt how to forge iron. Their aggressive weapons, frequently mentioned in the old sayings, were clubs, stones, swords, battle axes, slings, bows, arrows, and spears. Their defensive were skirts of mail, helms, and shields, adorned with figures of animals as armorial ensigns, and so highly appreciated as to be hereditary. On the whole, for the young Norsemen whose education was like the ancient Spartans, so the so-called Vikings are the really the Germanic tribes in general, if I'm not mistaken. They have a relation to the ancient Greeks, right? Like the Spartans or the Lacedaemonians, okay? And just as an aside, the Spartans were of the nation of Israel as well, or the Lacedaemonians, they were of the nation of Israel as well, and it's actually referenced in the Bible as well. But that's going to be another story for another day. I'm just getting back to the paragraph. So, exclusively calculated for a military life, the practice in using arms was necessary to make his body pliable and hardy. By the early and frequent exercises of which they also acquired an almost incomprehensible dexterity and muscular strength in using and wielding the sword. That's just going over their training regimens. So braver men never lived, truer men never drew the bow. They had courage, fortitude, sagacity, bodily strength, and perseverance. They shrunk from no dangers, and they feared no hardships. Odin is for us. Who can be against us? Was their watchword. And the old saga says, or the old sagas say, here it was beautiful to live and sad to die. So, as we can see here, this phrase right here, Odin is for us, who can be against us. Obviously, that's very, very similar, if not almost the exact same saying as what we just read in Romans 8:31. Okay, so just going back to the verse in Romans 8:31. Obviously, for those of you who know who know about the Bible, you know that Romans was written, of course, by Paul, and he would go amongst the Romans, or the people of ancient Rome, or of relatively ancient Rome, and he would go around and tell a lot of the people in the churches of Rome about what Christ taught, and why Christ was sent back, and things of that nature. But anyway, what Paul stated in that verse, if God is for us, who can be against us? That's obviously a phrase that was passed down even amongst the Scandinavians. Okay, and for those of you who don't know, the name Odin is very, very or not very, very, but is derived from God, the word or the name God. Okay, that's why he's known as the All-Father, or he's known as the chief God amongst all the other gods. Okay, because Odin has a correlation to a degree with the Most High of the Bible. And I'm not trying to state that Odin is the Most High of the Bible, or that he's equivalent to the Most High of the Bible, because obviously Odin, he's a mythical character. I know a lot of people will come on my channel and probably say, well, God is a mythical character too, but it's going to be another story for another day. But the concept of Odin, that was a concept that derived from the biblical God of the Bible. Okay, and Odin's name in and of itself, like I just stated, I believe, is a name or a word that actually derives from God. Okay, so we're gonna see that. We're gonna see that right now. All right, y'all. So now we're back in the Hebrew and Iberian race book, and I just want to read this paragraph down here, starting from this highlighted section right here. That's just going to confirm what I stated a minute ago. That being that Odin, the name Odin, derives from a Hebrew word that that basically was just another word for God, or the Most High of the Bible. Okay, so now let's just read this paragraph right here. So in order that the whole matter involved in this inquiry may be before our readers, we have further to state that one of the chief names by which the deity was known among the Hebrew race was God, or Adan, Adonis, or Odin. Okay, so the god Adan, I believe that is a Canaanite or Babylonian god. And Adonis, the god Adonis, I believe derives from this god, or he derives from the Babylonian god Tammuz. Okay, but as we can see here, both of these words, Adan and Adonis, are being linked with Odin. Okay, so Odin and Adonis, or Adan, those words are very, very similar to one another in terms of their origin. Okay, but we're gonna see more of that later on. But let me just keep reading. Or Bod, Bud, or Buddha. Of course, we see the god Buddha. Or by other forms of the original name. The name does not seem to have been regarded with so much veneration as that of Yahweh or Yah. At least we are aware that when the Jews, in reading the sacred scriptures, came to the nomen venerable, they are in the constant custom of pronouncing the name Adonai. Okay, so now this word Adonai, that's going to be another important word, because this is the Hebrew word that was associated with the Most High of the Bible. This was just another way of saying quote unquote God. Okay, like other words like Jehovah and Yahweh. This word was basically like those words. It was just another name for God. All right, so that is of Odin, or Adan, or Odin in its place. So once again, as I just stated, this is just another word for the Most High of the Bible. Okay, and as we see here, Adan and Odin are just words that took the place of Adonai. So once again, the name Odin, or the quote unquote God Odin, that word, or that quote unquote God, it derives from the Most High of the Bible. Okay, the name of Odin, the name of Odin is in direct correlation with the Most High of the Bible's name in the Hebrew language. But let's read some more information that's going to further substantiate that. Okay, so now let's read from this. I'm gonna start. Let me see. I'll start right here. So he can be recognized in the Persian Mithras, the bull annually sacrificed to rise again. A Sumerian god Tammuz, who the grieving goddess Inanna traveled to the underworld in order to raise from the dead, herself dying and resurrecting in the process. Adonis of Babylon and Syria, whose name so closely resembles one of the names of God in the Bible, Adonai. And then we see next to Adonai, included in the same breath, or in the same sentence as Adonis, Odin. Okay, so once again, Odin is equivalent to Adonai. All right. So now let's look at one more thing. Let's read one more thing here. I'll start from right here. So as he died of natural causes in Svitjod, Odin had himself marked with a spear point. He claimed that by this means all men killed with weapons belonged to him. Then he made his way to God's home to join his friends there. The Swedes believed he had come to the Asgard of old and would live there forever. They had faith in Odin and prayed to him. It was believed that he showed himself before a battle to decide on a victor. While others invited him to their home, Odin was burnt when dead. The belief was that the higher the smoke from any pyre, the loftier the place gained in heaven, and the deceased grew richer the more was burnt with him. Now, let me see. I'm going to just skip down to right here. So this tree association may suggest some comparison arising between this Nordic form, Odin, and Greek Adonis. So once again, Odin and Adonis are being likened unto one another. Okay? So except that the latter otherwise bears no resemblance, since he was a beautiful youth born out of a tree, loved by Aphrodite, and killed by a boar. Any connection must have been relatively late, i.e. reaching the north after the loss of the W. So one of the names of Odin before it became Odin was I believe Woden. Okay, I believe it's spelled Woden, Woden. And by the way, that's where we get the day of the week Wednesday from. Okay, you can go and you can look that up. The day Wednesday comes from Odin or Woden. Wednesday just means Woden's day. And then even days like Thursday and Friday, those days just mean, like Thursday, for example, just means Thor's day, right? Thursday, Thor's day. And then Friday, that's meant to be an allusion to the god Frigg or Frigga, who is the consort of Odin and the mother of Balder. Okay, so Friday comes from Frigg or Frigga. Okay, so a lot of the days of the week derive from a lot of the ancient Norse gods and goddesses. Okay, but that's another story for another day. So yeah, so the W in Odin, or excuse me, the W that is being referenced here is the older name of Odin, which was once again Woden, and that was who Odin was known by the other Germanic tribes outside of the quote-unquote Scandinavians. Okay, so but let me just keep reading. I.e. as in Odin, Adonis, as found in Greek, is based on a Semitic word meaning Lord. So that's going to be important to remember as well. Okay, so Adonis means Lord, or the word Adan or Don, those mean Lord, right? Like let me think. Actually, you know what? I'll reference that later. But yeah, the word Adonis or Adon, that just means Lord. so which would suit Odin. So once again, the names Adonis and Odin are basically here being correlated with one another. So as we can read here, Adonis, as found in Greek, is based on a Semitic word meaning Lord. So that Semitic word is the word that I referenced earlier, that being Adonai. Okay, so the word Adonis comes from Adonai, which was just another word for the Most High. Okay, so this is saying, once again, that the term Odin and Adonis, those words derive from the same word that means the Most High of the Bible, or Lord per se. Okay, so now let me move on real quick. You know what? Let's just go to the name Adonis. Let's see what the name Adonis means and what the or let's just see what the etymology of the term Adonis is. Okay, so the name Adonis is believed to be of Phoenician origin, from Adan, Lord. So once again, we see that same word Adan, or Lord. Okay, so now the Phoenician language was a language that that was the progenitor of the quote-unquote Hebrew language, and we're going to see that a little bit later. But the quote-unquote Phoenician alphabet, that was the progenitor, like I said, of the Hebrew language, okay, which was, of course, the language that was spoken by the nation of Israel. So, and once again, the name Adan is the progenitor word of Adonis. And just reiterating, Adonis and Odin, those words are equivalent. Those words are basically derived from the same fount. Okay, so now let's read something else. All right, so now let's look at the word Adan, or the name Adan. And as we can see here, as it states right here, this is a Phoenician word, or a Phoenician origin. So as I stated earlier, the Phoenician language, or the Phoenician alphabet, was the quote-unquote parent language of Hebrew. But we're going to see that in a little bit. But let's just read what the name Adonis means. So, or Adan, I should say. So Adan, Phoenician, literally means Lord. Adan has an uncertain etymology, although it is generally believed to be derived from the Ugaritic ad father. So the Ugaritic language is a Northwest Semitic language. So it's just another form of the quote-unquote Semitic language, okay? So of course the quote-unquote Semitic language, that's the language that the Hebrews spoke. So once again, Adan being a Phoenician word and deriving, or at least believed to have derived from the Ugaritic word that means father, or the Ugaritic language that where it means father. That should just confirm even more that once again the Phoenician language, that's just the parent language of or that's a language that's associated with the Semitic language. But we're going to see that in a little bit. So let's look at the etymology of the name Adan, or the word Adan. So the name of the Greek god Adonis is similar to a Semitic word. So the name of the Greek god Adonis derives from the Semitic word Adan. Okay, so the word Adonis, or the name Adonis, is basically a Semitic word, since it derives from a Semitic word. Okay, so Adonis, its progenitor word Adan, those mean the same thing. They mean Lord. Okay, and those are both quote unquote Semitic words. But let's keep reading. Yet there is no trace of a Semitic deity directly connected with Adonis, though there most likely was. There is also no trace in Semitic languages of any specific mythos connected with his Greek myth. Both Greek and Near Eastern scholars have questioned the connections. And now let's read this right here. This is going to give us a better understanding of how Adan relates to the word that's associated with the Most High. So in the Hebrew Bible, Adonai means my Lord, and is a term of respect that may refer to God, or to a superior, or to a human superior, or occasionally an angel. Whereas Adonai, literally my Lord's, is reserved for God alone. In Jewish tradition, the pluralization can be used to distinguish God from earthly lords and to increase his majesty. However, many critical scholars see the use of a plural as a remnant of a polytheistic past, with the word only later coming to refer to Yahweh, the single God of Judaism. It is thought that at least some biblical authors used the word originally in a polytheist sense. So once again, the word Adan has a connection with Adonai. Okay, and then of course, once again, Adonis, the god Adonis, by the name of Adonis, is directly associated with Odin. Okay, as we saw a little bit earlier. So, but let's read something else real quick here. Let me see. So now let's look at the word Adonai, which, as we've seen a numerous amount of times, it's another word for the Most High. But let's read the definition of the word Adonai. So Hebrew, a title of reverence for God, serving also as a substitute pronunciation of tetragrammaton. Origin of Adonai, literally my Lord, spoken in place of the ineffable name Yahweh. So as we can see, words nearby Adonai, adolescence, adolescent medicine, Adolf, doll's house. So Adonai, Adonijah, Adonis, Adan, Olam, Adopt. So once again, Adonis and Adan are being referenced as being words that derive from Adonai. Okay, so now it should be clearer, or a little bit more clearer, that Adonis is really just meant to be in reference to the Most High. Okay, and so just as Adonis is meant to be in reference to the Most High, so is Odin. Odin is just a word that derives from Adan or Adonis, or it's a word that's very similar to Adan and Adonis, and it's just a word that is meant to be an allusion to the quote-unquote Scandinavians' understanding that they once worshipped the quote-unquote God of the Bible, or the Most High of the Bible, right? Or in other words, Adonai or Yahweh. Okay, so they understood that there was a time when their ancestors at one point in time worshipped quote-unquote Adonai, and they just reinvigorated that word to mean Odin, or to come out to mean Odin. Okay, or Wotan, or I believe another form of Odin is Othin. Okay, all those words just derive from the same fount, that being Adonai. Okay, so they knew who their God was. It's just they had been subjected to, them and their ancestors had been subjected to so much quote unquote pagan exposure from other nations that they were kind of their belief system was a little bit contorted, and it drove them away from the Most High of the Bible, from their belief in the Most High of the Bible. But they always understood themselves to be or at least subconsciously they understood themselves to be the people of the book. Okay, but let's just look at one more definition just to confirm and double down even more that Adonai was in fact a quote-unquote Hebrew word, and it was in reference to the Most High of the Bible. So now we're at the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition. So now let's read this. So definition of Adonai, used in place of Yahweh or Yahweh as the name of the God of the Hebrews during prayer, recantation. So history and etymology of Adonai, Hebrew Adonai. Okay, so once again, Adonai, that's just a word that means the Most High of the Bible. Okay, so and that's, as we've already seen and as I've already gone through extensively, this is where the term Odin ultimately derives from. So they understood who they were. The Vikings, they understood who they were, and the Germanic tribes in general, right? Because once again, Odin wasn't just specific to the Scandinavians or the Vikings. He was a god who had a significance across the entire Germanic tribe religious system. Okay, so they all worshipped quote unquote Odin, or as he was more regarded on a wide scale as Woden. Okay, so all those tribes, the Germanic tribes, all those people knew who they were, according to according to their ancestry. They knew who they were. They derived from the quote unquote Israelites or the Hebrews per se. But I just want to move on to one more word that doesn't really have any relevance to what I'm talking about on this video, but I just want to go into it a little bit because it's important for number one, and then for number two, it's going to have a reverberation all throughout the videos on my platform or on my page. Okay, so and this word's going to be a word that also derives from Adonai or Adan. Okay, but it's going to be a word that that indicates, since it does in fact derive from Adonai or Adan, it's going to be a word that indicates what the Most High of the Bible looked like, or what he looks like. Okay, and even Christ, etc., and who the aboriginal man, that being the man who was made after the Most High's own image, as it states in Genesis, the 9th chapter and the 6th verse, it's going to give an understanding as to what exactly that meant, right? When the Most High said, let's make man out of our own image, or that man was made out of the image of the Most High. All that means is just God made the aboriginal man to look similar to him, all right, or similar to even the angels, because they were microcosms of the Most High. But let's look at what this word is that I'm referencing. So of course the word Dan. Okay, once again, Dan does in fact derive from Adonai, okay, or Adan, which just means Lord. And as we can see, the definition of Dan, it's an Irish word. The Irish name is derived from the Irish Dan. The name can either mean brown or chief or noble. Okay, so Dan, which of course is the progenitor word of the Dan with a singular N, means brown. All right, so I don't know if you guys remember, but I stated earlier that the name Donovan means like a brown-skinned chieftain or a brown-skinned warrior, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, and so people who have those names like Donovan Mitchell from the Utah Jazz, he has that name, or that name is meant to indicate somebody who looked very, very similar to him. Of course, for those of you who watch basketball, you know who Donovan Mitchell is, and you know what he looks like. He's what we would call, quote unquote, brown-skinned. Okay, he's a brown-skinned so-called black man. All right, so the word Dan means brown. So, but let's just look at a couple of other definitions of Dan. So Dan derives from a Latin word, dominus. Okay, so now let's look at what dominus means. So borrowed from Latin dominus, master, doublet of dom, domine, domini, and Dan. Okay, so once again, Dan derives from dominus. Okay. So now let's look at what dominus means. Plural of domini, master, right, or lord. Or sir, a title of respect formerly applied to a knight or clergyman, and sometimes to the lord of a manor. So what does Adan mean, or Adonis? We just read what those two words mean. Those mean lord, right? So domini or dominus, which is where Dan comes from, means the exact same thing. It's just in reference to a lord. So that's how you know that this word derives from Adan or Adonis. And of course, Adan and Adonis, as we've seen, derived from Adonai, all right, who is the Most High of the Bible. But let's look at another definition of Dan. So this interesting surname with variant spellings, dun. So now the word dun literally means black. Literally. You can look that up. It literally means black or dark. And other variants like Dene or Dune. Of course, Dan and Don may be either Celtic, Gaelic, or Anglo-Saxon in origin. It derives from the Old Gaelic Dan, brown, or the Old English pre-7th century dun, brown, or the Old English pre-7th century dun, which means dull, brown, or dark. So once again, this word dun, which is where you get last names like Duncan from, it means dull, brown, or dark, and was originally given as a distinguishing nickname to someone with dark hair or a swarthy complexion. All right, so this is gonna be something that I talk about a lot more down the line. I just wanted to reference it real quick. But once again, this word Dan has a very, very heavy significance to the Most High of the Bible. Okay, as it derives from the Hebrew word that means the Most High of the Bible. And so this word was created along with other variations like dun, which once again mean dull brown, which means like a dark brown, or as it states here, dark, and was given to somebody with swarthy complexion or a swarthy complexion. Okay, that should let you know why this word derives from Adonai, and who the Most High of the Bible even looks like. Okay, and even Christ, who of course is his son, and is just God as well. And you can read verses like Daniel, the 7th chapter and the 9th verse, where it states that Christ had hair like wool. And you can look up, another word for so-called black people's hair being quote unquote woolly hair, or black people having quote unquote woolly hair as being just a synonym for like kinky hair, or nappy hair, quote unquote nappy hair. Okay, so but once again, that's an entirely different story for another day. But let's just move on real quick. All right, so now let's look at the language of the Scandinavians, that being the quote unquote Runic script. Okay, now let's see what the Runic script, or how the Runic script has a relation to the quote-unquote Semitic or Hebrew language, right? I.e. the Phoenician language. Now let's read this real quick about the oldest form of the Runic script, or the Runic alphabet, that being Elder Futhark, or Elder Fabark, also known as the Older Futhark or Old Futhark or Germanic Futhark, is the oldest form of the Runic alphabet, or the Runic alphabets. It was a writing system used by Germanic peoples for Northwest Germanic dialects in the migration period. Inscriptions are found in artifacts including jewelry, amulets, plateware, tools, weapons, as well as rune stones in Scandinavia from the 2nd to 10th century. So now this is of course just explaining what Elder Futhark, or the oldest form of the Runic alphabet or the Runic script is. But now I just want to look at this over here under related scripts, okay? So scripts that were very, very close to, or are very, very close in relation to Elder Futhark, which once again is just the Runic script, or the language that the Vikings spoke, okay? So now let's look. Parent systems, Phoenician alphabet. So now let's look at the Phoenician alphabet. The Phoenician alphabet is an alphabet, more specifically an abjad, known in modern times from the Canaanite and Aramaic scripts found across the Mediterranean region. Right, so the Mediterranean region, that's like Italy, Greece, Lebanon, Israel, Albania, etc. So, but we'll look at that in a minute. So the name comes from the Phoenician civilization. The Phoenician alphabet is also called the early linear script, in Semitic context, not connected to Minoan writing systems, because it is an early development of the pictographic Proto or Old Canaanite script into a linear alphabetic script. So this just goes over what the quote-unquote Phoenician alphabet was. Now let's read this. The Phoenician alphabet was used to write the early Iron Age Canaanite languages, subcategorized by historians as Phoenician, Hebrew, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, etc. So, as we can see here, the Phoenician alphabet was as I just stated, the progenitor language of the Hebrew alphabet. And so now let's look over here. So now let's look at child systems for the Phoenician script. So child systems, Paleo-Hebrew alphabet. So now Paleo-Hebrew script, also Paleo-Hebrew, Proto-Hebrew, or Old Hebrew, is the writing system found in Canaanite inscriptions from the region of biblical Israel and Judah. Okay, so the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet, as I just stated, was derived from the same exact fount as the Vikings Runic script, that being the Phoenician alphabet. Okay, so the Hebrew alphabet, the Hebrew language or the Hebrew script, that was very, very close in relation to the Runic script. Okay, and the reason for that is, of course, because as I've stated throughout this whole entire volume, which is basically the main point of this whole entire volume, the Vikings, they did descend from the nation of Israel. Okay, and this is just yet another indication of that. So, but let's read a little bit more about the Runic script and where it derives from. So, you know what? Let's look at one more thing having to do with the Hebrew script. So, Hebrew Samaritan script. So, the Samaritans are a group of people that I'm going to talk about a little bit in later volumes. The Samaritans, they derive from, the Samaritans are also of the nation of Israel. They were part of the contingency of Israelites that weren't cast out into Assyrian captivity, if I'm not mistaken. And they also resided a lot in Turkey, right? So the area known as Anatolia, which is where a lot of the places that Paul visited was at. They were in Turkey, like Colossae, right? The place that is referenced in the book of Colossians, I believe that was in Turkey. The province of the Galatians, or Galatia, right? They were also a province in Turkey. So the people of Galatia and the people of Colossae, they descended from a lot of these Samaritans that settled in Turkey or Anatolia, okay, or that settled along those regions that I just named in Galatia, Colossae, etc. So that's going to be another story for another day. But Paleo-Hebrew script is a Northwest Semitic language, like Ugaritic, right? The language that I referenced earlier, of the Afro-Asiatic language family. So Afro-Asiatic, that's like the language that encompasses all of the countries along the Mediterranean area, the Mediterranean region. Okay. So, but let's move on real quick. And let's just look at another, let's look at something else having to do with the Runic script. So, let's look here on Briticana. So, Runic alphabet, also called Futhark, writing system of uncertain origin. Well, we just read what the origin was. But let's see, writing system of uncertain origin, used by Germanic peoples of Northern Europe, Britain, Scandinavia, right, or the quote-unquote Vikings, and Iceland from about the 3rd century to the 16th or 17th century AD. Runic writing appeared rather late in the history of writing and is clearly derived from one of the alphabets of the Mediterranean area. So that's once again the quote-unquote Afro-Asiatic area, right? We just read that their language, that being the Runic script, derived from the quote-unquote Phoenician alphabet. Okay, the Phoenician alphabet was the language that the runic script derives from. So we should know what this is in reference to, even though this article states that allegedly the origins of the runic script are uncertain. But let's keep reading. Because of its angular letter forms, however, and because early runic inscriptions were written from right to left, like the earliest alphabets. So Hebrew, if I'm not mistaken, was also written from left to right, or from right to left. Our runic writing system seems to belong to a more ancient system, right? No shit. Scholars have attempted to derive it from the Greek or Latin alphabets, either capitals or cursive forms. All right, so now we're going to see in a little bit where the Greek and the Latin alphabets come from, but let's keep going. At any period from the 6th century BC to the 5th century BC, or the 5th century AD, a likely theory is that the runic alphabet was developed by the Goths, which were just another Germanic tribe, as it says right here, from the Etruscan alphabet of northern Italy, and was perhaps also influenced by the Latin alphabet. So now let's look at the Etruscan alphabet. And just to give a background on who the Etruscans are, so the Etruscans were the first settlers of the area of the world that we call Italy, or the country Italy. Okay, some people will try and state that it was the quote-unquote Villanovans who were the first settlers of Italy, but for the most part, the Etruscans are regarded as the first settlers of Italy. And so the Etruscans, according to a man who a lot of scholars refer to as the quote-unquote father of history, a man by the name of Herodotus, the Etruscans derived from a group of people known as the Lydians. And the Lydians, they were a people that lived along the area that I referenced earlier, Anatolia or Turkey. The Lydians were said to have derived from one of the 4 sons of Shem, that being Lud. I believe he was the 4th son of Shem. And Shem had 5 sons, if I'm not mistaken, and Lud was the 4th one. He was the 4th one, if I'm not mistaken. So the people of the Etruscans, they derived from the Lydians, and by osmosis, that makes them the descendants of Lud. Okay, so of course, Lud being a son of Shem, that makes him and his descendancy quote unquote Semitic or Shemitic, because the name or the word Semitic just means to be a descendant of Shem, or to be one of the descendants who derived from Shem. Okay, but that's going to be something for another day. So those are the Etruscans, and so let's read what the Etruscan alphabet comes from. So Etruscan alphabet, writing system of the Etruscans, derived from Greek alphabet, originally learned from the Phoenicians. So the Greek alphabet, just to give a background on the Greek alphabet, that was an alphabet that was first introduced into Greece. The alphabetical form of the area in Greece was first introduced into Greece by a man by the name of Cadmus, spelled Cadmus, Cadmus. And so Cadmus, he was the one who brought in the script known as quote-unquote Linear B. Okay, and Cadmus's name in general means coming from the east, or from the east, right? So coming from the area that we would call today the quote-unquote Middle East, right? Or the area around like the Mediterranean region of the world. So Cadmus in mythology, or the conventional story of Cadmus, is as him as a quote-unquote Phoenician, right? So he's depicted as a Phoenician or a Canaanite in conventional history. But really Cadmus, he was just one of the 2 leaders of the nation of Israel during one of their migrations out of Egypt. Because for those of you who don't know, the Israelites had more than just one migration out of Egypt. Okay, the the immigration out of Egypt that was led by Moses wasn't the only immigration out of Egypt. Okay, there was another one that came before that, and the one that came before that was led by, like I said, Cadmus, and then by another man by the name of Danaus, right? Which is where the group of people known as the quote unquote Danans derived from. Danan spelled Danaans. Okay, according to Homer. Okay, and so the Danans, like I just stated, they were descended from Danaus, and I believe the Danans were the Achaeans, and so the Achaeans, if I'm not mistaken, were just descendants of the same group of people that Cadmus and Danaus established, that being the Mycenaeans. And the Mycenaeans, they were the dominant civilization of Greece that came after the Minoans, and then before the like the Spartans that I referenced earlier. And so but I just want to look at something real quick that confirms that Cadmus was in fact of the nation of Israel, and he was of the constituency of Israel that was casted out of Israel into Greece. So now let's read this. So this is a quote from a man by the name of Hecataeus. So Hecataeus was like an ancient 4th century BCE scholar, as it says right here. Okay, so Hecataeus, he was a historian or a scholar, and so this is what he has to say about what went down in Egypt during this time period. So when in ancient times a pestilence arose in Egypt, so the pestilence, of course, that's in reference to the plagues that the Most High sent on the Egyptians for not letting his people go, right? Moses told Pharaoh that if you don't let my people go, right, meaning the nation of Israel, if you don't let my people go, these plagues, I believe it was 10 plagues that will be casted on Egypt. Okay, so that's what this is in reference to, the pestilence that arose in Egypt. So let's keep reading. So the common people ascribed their troubles to the workings of a divine agency, i.e. the Most High. For indeed, with many strangers of all sorts dwelling in their midst and practicing different rites of religion and sacrifice, their own traditional observances in honor of the gods had fallen into disuse. Hence, the natives of the land surmised that unless they removed the foreigners, their troubles would never be resolved, I should say. At once, therefore, the aliens were driven out from the country, and the most outstanding and active among them, banded together, as some say, were cast ashore into Greece and certain other regions. Their leaders were notable men, chief among them being Danaus and Cadmus. Okay, so once again, as I stated earlier, the Most High sent the plagues, the 10 plagues, against Pharaoh, due to him not allowing the nation of Israel to be released from his bondage or from his captivity. So when it says here that the people who were casted out, or the foreigners that were casted out, it gives a reason why they were casted out. All right, it gives the reason why they were casted out as being them being the cause of the pestilence that was occurring in Egypt at the time. Okay, so that's why Pharaoh allowed a lot of the foreigners to be casted out. He allowed them to be casted out because they were of the nation of Israel. And once again, the reason why all that pestilence or all those plagues were happening was due to Pharaoh not allowing the nation of Israel to be freed, right? Freed from their bondage or free from slavery. And so he removed a lot of the people of Israel so that he could alleviate this pestilence. All right, so this just confirms right here that, like I stated before, or like I stated earlier, Cadmus was in fact of the nation of Israel. He was not a quote-unquote Phoenician. All right. right, so this is going to be the last little bit here of my proving of the Vikings descendancy from the nation of Israel. Okay, so now this is going to be just another page from the History of Scandinavia book that I read a little bit earlier. So now let's read what this author has to say about the Scandinavians and their almost seemingly odd or unexpected obedience of the law in the scriptures, because a lot of the things that the Vikings did was in accordance with the laws in the scriptures. Okay, so now let's just see what this author has to state about the Vikings and their seemingly unconventional, or one would think unconventional, obedience and adherence to the law without them even knowing it. So one murder became generally the cause of another, for although fines could be paid as atonement for a murder committed in an open and honest duel, the near relatives often required blood for blood. So this is just like a summary of like their laws and stuff like that. So a manner of thinking which a father being offered money for a murder committed on his only son, properly expressed in answering, I will not carry the corpse of my dearly beloved son in my pocket. And if a murder was, so let's skip over some of this. Let me see. Okay, let's start from right here. So every traveler was received kindly, and the person of the guest considered holy. And when a man entered into the house of his enemy, with whom he everywhere else would have to abide the issue of a bloody fight, he was, as long as he was his guest, safe from any outrage or mischief. On the whole, it was as if the apostles' words had been known to the ancient Norsemen. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Okay, so this author right here is basically acknowledging that the Scandinavians, or the Norsemen, they had a very, very strange, or seemingly strange, understanding of the law. Okay, despite them not even really being adherents to the law. Okay, because the Scandinavians, they actually rebelled against the attempts that were made by men like Charlemagne. Right, Charlemagne, that's somebody that I'm going to be referencing a whole lot on this channel. But Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, he tried to get the Scandinavians, along with the other Germanic tribes, to capitulate to quote-unquote Christianity. And he did that for a reason, because Charlemagne, he most likely knew who the Germanic tribes were. And so he tried to get a lot of the other quote-unquote pagan Germanic tribes to capitulate to Christianity, or the Bible, or the teachings of the scriptures. And so he would have like the Vikings, or he would try to get the Vikings or the Scandinavians and even the Anglo-Saxons to capitulate to the laws and the commandments of the scriptures. And once again, he did that for a reason. But as I already stated, the Vikings, they pushed back against that. They pushed back against the attempts to spread Christianity amongst their ranks. And they really didn't fully accept Christianity, or Christianity really wasn't widely spread amongst the Scandinavians until Harold Bluetooth, who was the son of a Viking, or a Jutlandish king of Denmark, known as Gorm the Old. Okay, and then even Gorm the Old, he wasn't down with Christianity either. A lot of the statues, I believe, that they tried to erect in Denmark, he would have them torn down, and then he would have the statues of their pagan gods rebuilt. So even the father of the man who would eventually go on to spread Christianity all throughout like Denmark, and then I believe he was the king of Norway as well. Even he was not fully down with Christianity. So it's very, very odd that the Scandinavians would know to do a lot of these things, like this author states right here. they knew to be courteous to the strangers, which is a law that's written in the Bible, to be courteous to the strangers. And so, but yeah, so that's just the first indication that the Scandinavians or the Vikings had the law known amongst themselves or known amongst their people, despite not really even being real adherence to the scriptures, or at least seemingly not adherence to the scriptures. But let's see what else this man has to state. So now let's start from right here. So very interesting, deep, and instructive is the religion or the mythology of the Norsemen, wherein their character and peculiar views of life have received a proper embodiment containing much of the spirit of obedience, for which St. Paul praises the heathens that are without the law, but do by nature the things contained in the law, showing the work of the law written in their hearts. So now the what he's referencing here, what this author is referencing here, is what Paul stated in Hebrews chapter 8 verses 10, and we're gonna look at that verse in a minute. But he's referencing what Paul stated about how the law, or the laws that were written in the covenant that were going to be established with the nation of Israel, would be, according to the Most High, written, quote unquote, written in their hearts and written in their minds as well, meaning they would have an understanding, as this person states right here, they would have an understanding of the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High that are written in the scriptures. All right. So now let's just look at a couple verses that that go along with what this author stated. So now Jeremiah chapter 31 verses 31 through 34. Let's read. So the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and the people of Judah. So what has to be understood before I keep reading is that there was a separation that was made between Israel and Judah, i.e. the northern kingdom, which was Israel, and the southern kingdom, which was Judah. Okay, so there was a separation made between these two houses, which was, I believe, precipitated by Solomon. And so the house of Israel, the people of Israel, they were like the other 10 tribes outside of Judah and Benjamin. And so that's why right here we see that the differentiation between Israel and Judah is made, because they were split up into different houses, or into different kingdoms, like I just stated, Israel being the northern kingdom and Judah being the southern kingdom, if I'm not mistaken. So let's keep reading. So it will not be the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt. So he's of course talking about Moses. So because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord, this is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel. All right, after the time, declares the Lord, I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God and they will be my people. All right, so when the Most High is talking to Jeremiah right here, he states that I will make the people of Israel. He's referencing, when it talks about Israel, it's talking about the 10 tribes that were casted out of the land of Israel. So that includes like Manasseh, Ephraim, Zebulun, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Dan, etc. All those tribes that were casted out of Israel, they're what's being referenced here when it talks about I will make with the people of Israel. I will make a covenant with the people of Israel. So that's in reference to these scattered tribes of Israel that would, as I've stated earlier, that will go on to become known as the Germanic tribes. Okay, the Germanic tribes as a whole, they were of the nation of Israel. Okay, I think I referenced earlier the Celts, they were also of the nation of Israel. Okay, and various other peoples across the world, or across the four corners of the world, they were of the nation of Israel. Okay, but particularly the Germanic people, since those are the people that we're talking about right now, those were people of the nation of Israel. Okay, as we've been able to see incrementally throughout this volume, I've been able to prove that the Germans, right, just going back to the Hebrew and Iberian race book, that book outright stated that the Germans, or that the Jews, or that the nation of Israel, the Hebrews per se, were amongst the contingency of the ancient Germans in abundance. Okay, so the people of the ancient Germanic tribes, those were people of the nation of Israel. So once again, it's talking about the scattered tribes of Israel that were scattered across the four corners of the known world. Okay, so and just like the author stated in the History of Scandinavia book, it was almost as if the law was already known unto the Scandinavians, as if it was a code of conduct that was passed down to them from their ancestors from generation to generation, right? And then on the other page, I believe it was 21, he even stated that that Paul, or he referenced the verse that Paul wrote in Hebrews chapter 8 verses 10, where he stated that the law will be written in their hearts, or in the hearts of the quote unquote heathen. Once again, the heathen is in reference to what this verse says right here. I will make a covenant with my people Israel. After that time, declares the Lord, I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God. That's referencing the nation of Israel, or the scattered tribes of the nation of Israel that will go on to become known as, like I said, the Germanic tribes and the Celts, and then even the Scythians, who I mentioned earlier, who I'll be talking about a little bit later on. Right, the Scythians, the quote-unquote barbarians, right? Those are another group of people that I'll be speaking about later on. But they're even referenced in Colossians, the 3rd chapter and the 11th verse. So once again, that's who this is in reference to. So now we can start to understand why the Scandinavians or the Vikings adhered to the law so closely, or so intently. Because once again, the law was already made privy to them, because the Most High allowed them to already have it instilled within them to understand the law. That's why they followed it so closely, even though, like I said, they really weren't that big on quote unquote Christianity or the Bible. They liked their gods. They liked Odin and Thor and Freya and Frigg and all them, and Loki. They liked those guys. They weren't following the scriptures until, like I said, Harold Bluetooth. Okay, but let's look at Hebrews chapter 8 verses 10. So this is the verse that author was referencing in the book. So let's read it real quick. So, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws into their hearts and write them on, I will put my laws into their minds and write them on their hearts. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people. So once again, the laws that the author stated were written in the hearts of the Scandinavians, right? I'm gonna go back to that page real quick. Just go back just to see exactly what he said. So, very interesting, deep, and instructive is the religion of the mythology of the Norsemen, wherein their character and peculiar views of life have received a proper embodiment, containing much of the spirit of obedience. So when he talks about the spirit of obedience, he's talking about the spirit of obedience that they naturally had towards the law of the scriptures, right? So they had a quote-unquote spirit of obedience, or they just had a natural understanding that they were supposed to adhere to the law, for which St. Paul praises the heathens that are without the law. So once again, we just read who the heathens are in reference to, right? This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel. Okay, so those were the quote unquote heathens who this person is referencing here, that are without the law but do by nature the things contained in the law. showing the work of the law written in their hearts. So that has a direct correlation with this verse right here. So the Scandinavians or the Vikings, they had the law written in their hearts because, once again, the Most High allowed them, for number one, to have a natural understanding of the laws and the statutes and the commandments of the scriptures, but also because they were statutes that were passed down to them from generation to generation. Despite how depraved they would eventually become, and despite how corrupted they will become by the other nations that they were allowed to be subjected to, right? Like the Assyrians and the Medes or the Iranians, right? Despite being subjected to all those people, they were allowed to, or they were able to still follow, at least to a degree, to some degree, the law that they adhered to back when they were in the land or in the nation of Israel. Okay, so that right there should be enough to prove that that the Vikings, the Scandinavians, they were of the nation of Israel. Okay, so that's going to conclude this video series. I know this was a rather extensive video series, but I just hope that most of you guys who come onto really all of you guys, but most of you guys who come onto this channel will watch each volume and each part. Even if you gotta split it up into different days or whatever, or if you gotta split it up into different times of the day, then you can do that. But just please make sure that you watch all of these videos, because once again, as I stated in volume 1, in the beginning of volume 1, I created this channel so that black people, especially black people in this country, could have a better understanding of their true and exact history. Okay, that's why I created this channel, because one of the main reasons why we have so many problems in our community is because we don't know who we are. Okay, we don't know who we are. We don't know where we come from, so we don't know who we need to be and what we need to do. That's why a black man has no problem seeing another black man walk across the street who may be wearing like opposite colors of whatever group they're a part of, and he has no problem killing that other so-called black man, because once again, we have no cultural affinity with one another, meaning we have nothing to bind us together culturally, because we don't know what our culture is. And the reason why we don't know what our culture is because we don't know our history. So it's important that we research our history and even are taught our true and exact proper history, so that we know who we are and where we come from. Okay, so I would just like to I would just like for all of you guys to watch all of the volumes, no matter how extensive they are. Just please watch all of the volumes. Okay, so but once again, that's going to conclude this video series, so I'm out.